Good evening, folks. It's Friday, September 10th. Tomorrow is the 11th. And I'm Joe Evans. I'm here on KRTD News this evening with Madeline Hoffman, your regular host for the second Friday. How are you doing today, Madeline?
I'm doing fine. It was a long day, but I'm feeling refreshed and I'm ready and raring to go. So,
Excellent.
yeah.
Glad to have the New Jersey candidate for governor here with us this evening. Green Party, of course. So, Reef, if we can go ahead and move on forward with the first story. Excellent. So, Rashida Tlaib corrects JIm Clyburn. 3.5 trillion is the floor. And remarks by the prominent South Carolina Democrat warned one observer could easily ruin negotiations and imperil the party's reconciliation agenda. We are already seeing fractions in the Democratic Party. Congresswoman Rashida of Michigan pushed back late Wednesday after fellow Rep. JIm Clyburn, the third ranking Democrat in the House, said the 3.5 trillion was not the floor, but rather the ceiling for the emerging budget reconciliation package, a position that puts him firmly at odds with many members of his own party. In an appearance on CNN, Clyburn, the Democrat from South Carolina, falsely claimed that no one has ever said the popular 3.5 trillion figure represents the floor for the reconciliation negotiations. In recent days, as Common Dreams has reported, Senator Bernie Sanders, the independent from Vermont, and Representative Pramila Jayapal, the Democrat from Washington, and other prominent progressives publicly made clear that 3.5 trillion is already a compromise and that they will not approve anything less. What do you think of Madeline?
Well, first of all, you don't give away what your negotiating strategy is going to be. That's number one. You never do that. Number two, if you've already negotiated and compromised on something and brought it down, why would you say that that's the ceiling and it could go even lower? It's the Democrats. This is one reason the Democrats don't do what people want them to do. I say as a Green who's watched Democrats very carefully over the last 25 years. We want so much more. Some people want so much more from the Democrats than they're able to give or willing to give. So we'll see if Common Dreams reporting on what progressives within the party are saying, whether the Democrats really mean it, that this is already a compromise and they won't do anything less. I at this point in time, I shrug my shoulders at news about Democratic Party infighting, because generally we know who wins. The more moderate Democrat, the one asking for less, is the one who generally wins. So that's where I am with this. I don't know. How about you, Joe? How about you?
Well, this actually goes back to a discussion we had with regards to the Senate budget here about 2 weeks ago, maybe even 4 weeks ago. We were talking about how the Senate managed to make arrangements with the Democrats and got 10 Republican senators to sign off on a 1.5 trillion budget bill, very much like part of this. And part of the agreement, in order to get those 10 Republican senators to bless off on it, was that this 3.5 trillion would go away. In exchange, the 1.5 trillion for the one bill would bring this down closer to probably about 1.5, maybe even 1 trillion in order to cover the balance of the figures. So again, this is negotiations going back and forth between the House and the Senate. And it's been going on for quite a while now. Part of the problem, of course, was Bernie Sanders came out with this plan long time ago saying 3.5 million. He came out with a number 3.5 million before the Senate trillion.
Yes. And we're really going down, Joe.
Yeah, let's add 6 more zeros onto that. But as far as what's going on, Bernie came out with the 3.5 trillion price tag before the Senate and the House got together negotiating in order to get the Republicans on board. The deal with the 1.5 that the Republicans got it down to was that was coming off of this price tag.
And
that
did they,
after Bernie made his initial pitch.
did they talk about specifics, Joe? Did they indicate what would get cut? Because a $1.5 trillion or $2 trillion is a lot of money to cut. And I know people want all kinds of things, and our experience this past week in New Jersey with Hurricane Ida showed first of all that a lot of areas are more vulnerable to flooding than they've ever been. There's more tropical storms and hurricanes than there have been for a number of years, and so people are looking for money to combat climate change. People are looking for an extension, on the moratorium eviction, the eviction moratorium. They're also looking for an increase in unemployment benefits. We're still in the pandemic. People still need some kind of assistance from the federal government. Now, I know you don't think that the government does any good in many cases. As a libertarian, that would be your point of view. But was there any indication in this compromise with the 10 Republicans about what would wind up being cut?
Well, ideally, everything that went into the first bill would be taken out of the second bill. As far as what's cut beyond that, it's hard to say. Of course, again, when you're looking at negotiations between the Senate and the House, things that got added to the 1.5 trillion bill that were never in the 3.5 trillion were probably nested into the process. Again, this goes into, and we'll talk about it a little bit later on, is how we fund the Department of Defense and what was going on with our withdrawal, as well as maybe continued occupation of Afghanistan as a result of previous plans. Because again, Bernie's promotion for this bill, as well as the negotiation with the Senate Republicans, all of this negotiation was done prior to what went down, last month on the 15th with regards to the Taliban actually taking over all of Afghanistan. So again, we're looking at negotiations based on events and plans that are now no longer intrinsic to what's going on with the world as we see it.
Well,
so some of that 1.5 trillion probably.
But I think that also another event that took place was last week's Hurricane Ida. There's at least 7, maybe more than 7 New Jersey counties now that have gotten been declared disaster areas and qualify for emergency relief. And I mean, I've lived in New Jersey. Okay, I went to college, so I'd be away for a semester and then I'd come back, or I lived overseas a couple of times. But basically, I've lived in New Jersey all my life. That would be just about 65 years, 65 in November. This kind of flooding where places like Bloomfield got 9 inches of water, Patterson, Newark, people were taking kayaks out on the streets to get from place to place. And the water was just pouring in to people's basements and ground floors and damaging and destroying family businesses and such. This is not normal for New Jersey. And so that might be another factor to include in the negotiations over what money is needed and what it's needed for.
Well, and this is one of those things that's really going to get interesting because we continue to see the need for money in order to clear up issues going on all over the place. We need money for Hurricane Ida. We need money for withdrawal of the troops. We need money for support of, this. We need money for support of that. And literally, the Federal Reserve right now and Department of Treasury is printing money off nonstop. And we're quickly reaching that point where we're dealing with the effects of inflation, simply because none of that money is actually backed by anything solid, and it's literally flooding the market. And whether that's going to contractors, whether that's going to corporations, a number of different issues. And again, I can go back to the Green Party's position on modern monetary theory and the fact that we've been existing and working with that concept now ever since Nixon went off the silver standard. We continue to deal with inflation, part of the misery index, that combination of inflation and unemployment that continues to increase stressors on the community. And then you add on top of that the pandemic, you add on top of that natural disasters like the hurricanes. And like you said, we're heading into a record year for hurricanes and tropical storms all up and down the East Coast, as well as through the Gulf of Mexico. Louisiana got hit hard by Hurricane Ida, and then you got New Jersey and New Orleans. The whole East Coast is getting
New York
slammed.
City, even New York City got flooded out, akin to Hurricane Sandy, but worse, Superstorm Sandy. I mean, subways and people's apartments. My goodness, look at that stuff, and you'd say, "Is this real? Is this happening right now, or is this somebody's idea of a science fiction movie?" It was horrifying, terrifying. And then people were just found. I think we're now up to 29 people who have been confirmed dead in New Jersey. And these two teenagers were found today. They had been in a car, a man and a woman, and they tried to get out, and they got carried away by the waters of the flood. And these are things, you said it too. I mean, these are things that they're not normal, but they may become, they have not been normal, but they may very well become normal. And where's the money coming from? I mean, I've always talked about the military budget, and we can talk about that later, but
so you can go ahead and read off the rest of this article here. Somewhere between 1.5 and 3.5 trillion, there is 2 trillion, Clyburn said. Those 2 trillion are there, and I think there's a lot of room for people to sit down and negotiate. It may be that when you're sitting around the table, you may not need 3.5 trillion to do what the president wants done and what the country needs done. Let's work on it and stay out of all the negotiating in the media. Observers warn that Clyburn's public intervention in the ongoing reconciliation talks could be highly damaging to the Democrats' efforts to secure as much climate and safety net funding as possible in the package, which represents a centerpiece for President Joe Biden's domestic policy agenda. To those advocating for a lower price tag, Pelosi asked, where would you cut? Childcare, family medical leave paid for, universal pre-K, home health care? Earlier this week, Jayapal,
I think that's about where we got to stop here.
The chair of the 100-member Congressional Progressive Caucus told the Washington Post that the view, there is no flexibility on the price tag.
I don't. Okay,
that's where we go, ma'am.
I don't see it, but it's okay. I mean, I think you're right there. That makes perfect sense, and I believe I read that somewhere today when I was reviewing. But see, she's not even putting in things like combating climate change. She's not putting that in at all, or extension of unemployment benefits, or any of those things. The economic issues, some of those economic issues that people are really concerned about too. It's funny though. We're negotiating in the media, right? I also,
that's how we do it.
I also want to say one other thing, that I think it's a little disingenuous to say that Clyburn's remarks will damage the negotiations, because I have a feeling that the negotiations would be difficult and challenging with or without Clyburn's remarks, because of the split in the Democratic Party and what you mentioned earlier, Joe, the need to get Republicans on board, at least the way that our current elected officials see it. You know, and so there are plenty of pitfalls that were already there before these remarks were made.
Well, I find
Absolutely.
I find it interesting, Pelosi coming in, you know, Pelosi would not be the person to me to come in and say, hey, what are you going to cut? Any of these things? Like this is, you know, like this is the floor.
Have you seen
this
my
is the
refrigerator?
bottom. Yeah, like she's the one with gallons of $200 a scoop ice cream in her freezer, and you know, she's saying, are you gonna cut this? And to me, it's more of the statement of, you know, our base likes this stuff, right? Like, it's, are you gonna be the one that cuts the things that our base really likes right now? Because we're not giving them much of anything else. You know,
Yeah,
what
no,
are you?
we're not.
What are you gonna cut all this? Like, this is our handouts that we're trying to get them to shut up with this. You know,
Good point.
These are bread and
the
circuses,
crumbs.
man. This is our bread and circuses.
Yeah.
You know, if you
Yes.
can't afford the bread and circuses, you know,
Yeah.
the population
What are you gonna do? Well,
Well,
somebody
you know,
somebody had on Reddit either this last week or whatever that essentially their price of their beer in their local bar was worth, like, you know, twice their hourly wage or whatever. It was like the classic, like,
oh geez.
Karl Marx, like, you know, you can't afford to, like, buy beer in your tavern, you know, like, it's
right?
craziness. I mean, the economy right now is, it's like everywhere you look politically, we're not doing well, you know.
No.
So
And I think you made a really good point, Reef, that this is political posturing at its best or worst,
yeah,
depending on your point of view here. And it's a distraction, this kind of debate or discussion in the media, because we know who's going to win out in the end. We know which interests are going to win out in the end. And yeah, maybe we'll get some little part of what's
it could also
what's
be
needed, but
it could also be that, you know, that the establishment Democrats will let that get past, you know, talks if people like Clyburn and stuff are going to publicly let it fail, right? If they have those, you know, gooses around the neck, well, it's their fault, not, you know, and it means the squad can kick the can down the road. See, we tried, they didn't give it to us, right? And you know, it's because of these people, and you got to make sure that you got to primary them out, and you know, all that stuff. And except if they're gonna be, it's like, all right, unless it has this in it, we're gonna vote every one of these down, right? You know, unless you're gonna play hardball right back, which is what they're trying to do. This is where you gotta, you know, you gotta have those cojones to be able to be a politician in this regard. So, you know,
talking about cojones, let's move on to Texas and what's going on with Republicans.
Good segue,
good transition.
Joe. What a great segue.
Yeah, so game changer. Biden Department of Justice applauded for suing Texas over new abortion ban. Thank you, President Biden, for the Department of Justice for joining this fight with us to protect Texans from this dangerous, unjust, and unconstitutional law.
You're here.
Jessica Corbett. Hey, reproductive rights advocates on Thursday praised the Biden administration for legally challenging Texas's new anti-choice measure, banning the termination of pregnancy after 6 weeks and empowering vigilantes to sue anyone who aids and abets such an abortion. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland announced the Department of Justice's lawsuit against the state filed in a federal court of Texas during a press conference Thursday afternoon, saying the act is clearly unconstitutional under the longstanding Supreme Court precedent. Okay. Whoa. Alexis McGill Johnson, President and CEO of Planned Parenthood Federation of America, applauded the Justice Department's filing, which came after Garland promised earlier this week that the Department of Justice, under pressure from supporters of reproductive freedom, including congressional Democrats, would explore all options to challenge the law.
Remember where we heard that name, Merrick Garland? We've had,
Yeah.
speaking of US Supreme Court, we certainly have had a lot of people really highlighting why they were concerned and upset. I mean, not only just for the loss of life when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, but then also for the direction the US Supreme Court might go on issues like this.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't know whether Merrick
Well-
Garland would have done any differently, how he would have ruled if he had been on the US Supreme Court. Don't know. Do you want to keep reading or should I continue commenting?
I want to go ahead and get into this. Reason why is because the letter of the law is particularly important. So the law, which was passed in May, went into effect Wednesday, says that any pregnancy in which a heartbeat is detected cannot be aborted. That effectively means if you're 6 weeks pregnant, you cannot have an abortion in the state of Texas, because that is around when most fetal cardiac activity can be detected. Doctors opposed to this legislation say that is misleading language and that the fluttering detected isn't always necessarily a heartbeat so early in a pregnancy. The law makes no exceptions for rape, sexual abuse, or incest.
Mhm.
The law does something else novel and incentivizes the public to police abortions. It
Mhm.
allows people, anyone living in the state of Texas, to sue an abortion provider or anyone else they suspect is aiding and abetting abortions after the 6-week mark. So the woman seeking an abortion in Texas herself can't be sued, but the provider could, the person who drove her there, the counselor who referred her, and on, explains the Post Carolyn Kitchener. The law sets a $10,000 award to be paid by the defendant for any successful lawsuit to stop an abortion.
So I've heard people saying as well that the penalty for getting an abortion is worse than the penalty for somebody who commits a rape. I mean, it just really, this kind of skews things around and gets sets up a situation where, you know, if you rape a woman, then you follow her around, and if you see that she's going to get an abortion, you can sue the provider. There's so much that's wrong with this. So much that's wrong.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely. This is another one of the Texas bills that empowers the rapist. Yeah, in addition to that, it continues to complicate the situation because literally this is a $10,000 bill for everyone in a woman's support network if she needs to get an abortion.
Yep.
If someone provides her shelter during her time seeking the
Uber
abortion,
drivers.
it's a $10,000 bill. Driver,
Oh.
$10,000 bill.
But the
Yeah.
drivers
Referral,
are going to defy
$10,000
this.
bill.
They've said, haven't they? That
Well,
they're
and I
going
know-
to defy this Uber and Lyft.
I know
Mhm.
also online, you know, there's been massive like coordinated efforts to of the public trying to deal with these bounty hunter organizations that come up. I know Reddit's had to ban at least
Called
one.
ambulance chasers.
Yeah,
It's
pretty
called
much.
ambulance chasers.
You know, my
but
mother
this-
worked. My mother worked at an abortion clinic in Alabama, right? She was a surgical tech and counselor there, right? And every time these things come up, she can only think about the time where one of the abortion clinics, I think it was in Mobile, right, had gotten bombed, right? That someone had bombed that
Oh, yeah.
clinic, and they had to deal with all the patients that would have been going there, right? You know,
Yes,
that
yes.
they were, you know, so it's a classic, you know, and I'm sure it's the classic, if you make something, you know, illegal that shouldn't be, people will seek it, you know, will still seek that service out, you know, and it will be
Oh, yeah.
from a place,
This.
it will be from a place, or, you know, my mother talks about someone who used a lie douche to try and do the same thing.
Ooh,
And, you know, she
that's harsh, man.
unfortunately perished from that, right? You know, that there's
Yeah.
that the people who usually from my studies and stuff, and I grew up in a place where we had the highest number of teen pregnancies in the state of Florida, right? We were also one of the most religious towns. We had more churches than, you know, than like any other county in the area. right? And you know, from the women that I grew up with, who I know one that committed suicide because the family essentially ostracized them, right? The minute she kept the child, right? That, you know, they wouldn't let her have an abortion, and they also, you know, wouldn't support her once the child was, because, you know, in their eyes,
Right.
she's the, you know, town, you know, harlot that, like, that it's immediate like, they're the ones to tell you that you shouldn't try to deal with this, right? That you should, you know, make sure that you need to deal with these, and then no help to deal with those consequences,
No,
you know,
no
and no
help
no
after.
cultural support, no whatever, and these women are forced to fend for themselves, and you know that can't help the child, as well as these same people don't want any help for any age group of children, you know. There's no daycare that they
There's no
want. There's no, you
right.
know, all the way up until they send you off to either prison or war, which they're more than willing to draft you, and they're more than willing to, you know, have capital punishment. That's fine for
Oh,
them
yeah,
in the
absolutely.
sanctity of life. That's fine, you know.
Uh,
So
there's no exceptions here whatsoever.
yeah,
No
No,
exceptions.
none.
And some people have
Yeah,
nicknamed the bill, or maybe that's a bad word to use because it sounds too frivolous, but they've given it another name, which is the coat hanger bill.
mm-hmm.
And
it is.
you know,
You know,
and you've mentioned a couple of other ways people can try to perform the abortions themselves. I
Yeah,
just want to say here that I'm working with a Green Party candidate for governor of Texas. She'll be running in 2022. I'm running for governor in New Jersey this year. We're going to work together to issue a statement as two candidates for governor who would never, ever, ever let something like this go through, would never sign it into law, and would work to protect, just as you were talking about, Reef, to
I
protect
also
the rights of the woman.
I also know that the Satanists have claimed religious exemption from this
yes,
law,
they have.
Mhm,
because they
mhm.
have an abortion ritual, that they have in their cultured religion. Um,
Mhm.
but you know, I speaking to this, the religious reasons for people wanting this bill, you know, the Bible condones abortion in multiple places, right?
Mhm.
Absolutely.
You know, it
Mhm.
tells women to take particular, it gives recipes. It tells, you know,
Mhm.
Yeah.
if they've committed adultery, that that child shouldn't come to term, and that you should abort the fetus.
Right,
You know,
right.
again, this is, you know, if anyone should care about, you know, children's lives, it's definitely not God in that sense, because how many times has he told some, you know, person that could hear him, you know, to go bring his child up to the top of the mountain, and just like he did the goat previously, to slay the child, right? That
Right.
these are things that apparently aren't sanctimonious in the eyes of Yahweh, right? And you
Hmm.
know, so I think, to me, that,
The-
you know, most of these people don't deal with this unless it affects them personally, and they feel like they have a moral high ground here, and
Well,
you know,
and that's part of the problem, Reef,
yeah,
is they do believe they have a moral high ground. They believe that they have some sort of mission from God, you know, and in spite of the fact that God gave man free will, you know, we are here on this planet in order to embody God's will. Even if we take that particular approach to the way things are going, you can't really do that in any way, because you cannot address every one of those very specific situations in a meaningful way as long as you continue to persist in this universal policy that includes no exceptions for rape, no exceptions for sexual abuse, and no exceptions for incest. I
Well,
mean, I hate to bring up straw man arguments like this, but literally, we could have a 45-year-old father who knocks up his 16-year-old daughter,
right.
who's suing his ex-wife for
He could
helping her get an abortion.
collect $10,000
Collect ten
if he
thousand dollars. You know,
if he sued them, and
right?
you know,
Collect 10
and
grand for knocking up your daughter. What
Yeah.
world am I living in?
right. Well, and
know.
it's funny you should say that right at this point, Joe, because I was thinking about the Taliban and people's concerns about how religion and government get intermingled with the Taliban. I think some of what they say is a little bit exaggerated for effect, but there is a concern about the Taliban and religion and the way it affects the women. And here we are in our own state of Texas, doing something where
Our Christian
religion,
Taliban.
what's that?
Our Christian Taliban.
Our Christian Texan Taliban.
Vanilla ISIS. Yes.
Right. And yet, well, I do think that there's a group of people who, as you both are saying, more evangelistic in nature, who are supporting this, but I've seen a lot of opposition.
So let me set the record straight. I believe.
Hold on. So, what is this young lady's name? Because I forget her
Poopy
actual name.
pants.
It's a
yeah.
whole long story with that. What is her actual name?
I have no idea.
Joe.
I have no idea.
I try and forget her because she's such a bad,
Yes,
she's
representation
literally-
of human, values.
Well-
and yes. Let me find her.
There's something that says Toilet Paper USA right near that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty appropriate. Poopy
Caitlin
pants.
Bennett.
Caitlin Bennett.
That's
Oh
it.
gosh.
So I wanted to
Okay,
pull up.
Caitlin Bennett.
I wanted to pull up.
We're
this
gonna
'cause it
listen to this?
pertains- Yeah, it's real short. Trust me.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So let me pull this over.
I don't know how much of it I'll be able
22
to
seconds
stomach.
is all. It's all you had to get through.
I can do
just,
it.
There we
I just
go.
want you to
I
see
can
the
do it.
So
ridiculous-
let me set the record straight. I believe abortion should be illegal in every single circumstance. What about rape? What about incest? What about blah, blah, blah? I didn't stutter. I said what I said. Every single circumstance. I believe women should be held legally accountable for killing or seeking to kill their child.
Yeah. So this is
Oh,
Caitlin
That's
Bennett.
someone who's never been on the other side.
Yes.
and there's no men have no role to play here. Men have no reason to be held accountable in any way, shape, or
Well,
form. It's the
yeah.
woman.
Here's one of the things, and this is one of those things. This law actually creates a situation and creates awareness. Now, we all know nobody likes to see abortion as the primary means. So how do we go about reducing abortions
Yes.
without legislation? And that goes back to culture. How do we create a
It's
culture
called-
of respect for women?
it's
How
called
do we create a
sexual
culture of respect?
education. That's not abstinence
Well,
only.
and that's part of it. Now,
Planned Parenthood
one of the
on top
things
of
that
it. You know.
Yep. One of the things I've seen pop up on Twitter is the idea that a woman should seek a $10,000 retainer from every man she has sex with.
That's a thought.
Okay, now this does several things, and it's actually creates a financial reservoir for her to fall
Yes.
back on if he ends
Yes.
up bailing on the process, because she's got the 10K. Now, the thing is her 10K will never actually be at risk of the suit because they can't sue the mother directly. They can sue everybody
Right.
else around her.
Right.
But the thing is if that $10,000 retainer is used to pay for the abortion, the man who gave her the money is the one who paid for the abortion, and in turn, he is suing himself.
Now that's a
So literally
really-
that 10,000 he thinks he's getting, it turns into a null and void situation.
that's
well
a
as-
really interesting idea, and this is what you're saying, Joe, about this being educational in that sense,
One of
because
the
people
solutions.
can come
One of the
creative
solutions I heard.
ideas. Sorry, Reef.
You're fine. One of the solutions I heard was that if we just started giving every male child, once he reaches sexual adulthood, that we just give him a vasectomy, right? We'll get a sample so that we have some just in case, right? And then send him off into the world with those tubes tied, and we should reduce the amount of
Oh
pregnancies.
my God,
by
Reef,
a
you
lot.
just sexualized every 12-year-old male in the United States.
I mean,
But
they
did
do that to themselves, but yes.
Well,
But is
But
but I think we were talking about what we started off by talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, again, that's another idea where, you know, that in theory addresses some of the issues that we're concerned about. But we started to talk about sex education in schools.
Yes.
We started to talk about real prevention.
Yeah.
Yes.
But these ideas are very creative. And there's vasectomies.
Vasectomy.
Are
Yes.
they? I thought they're reversible.
They're
right?
reversible.
Yes.
They're reversible. So
Or
Most
there's
of the
even
time.
there's even a fun new thing that is not as permanent as a vasectomy, but they go in and inject a bit of expanding foam into the vas deferens, right? I think that's the word, right? One of those medical terms. And then that expands and then that degrades over time, right? And, you know, eventually is, you know, you get it again, you know, on a you know, scheduled time frame, right? If you want to continue that. I've also heard that there's now a male pill in the works that I think has been seeing studies.
There is, and
That's
one of the things that's interesting about the pandemic that's going around now is they've actually found that ivermectin creates temporary sterility.
Sterility. Yeah, I heard that from one study there over in, that was the one at the river blindness that they were working on that there. Who knows, man? I'll let the doctors do the doctor stuff. And
yes, good. That I'm with you on that, Reef. But you know what's interesting though, and an inconsistency with that is, and I've seen this in many places. The same people who are saying no mask mandates and no vaccine mandates are going to be ones who are the ones who are saying she must have she cannot have an abortion.
Yeah.
My body,
that
my
Venn
choice.
diagram is a perfect circle, by the way.
Yes.
It's a perfect circle.
They are the same.
Which means,
people.
They're the same people. I wasn't sure if that was a heart or what it was. Okay, I get it.
It's a circle. I'm pretty sure.
But yeah, I find this whole story. Yeah, it's
so
two
we
steps.
can move on to the next.
2 steps forward, 1 step back. We're having to deal with Roe v. Wade again. We're having to make these arguments again.
Yes, we are.
You know,
and we'll see where that goes, because aren't there a couple of other states with these kinds of laws in the pipeline? So
there's a lot of states that already have trigger bills in place.
Yeah.
But the idea is the last suit that the SCOTUS refused to hear was one that was just poorly presented in the first place. You know, the law hadn't gone into effect, so there was nobody who is directly affected. Therefore, there was no reason for the pursuit of the suit. Now that the law has gone into effect and the entrance of the Department of Justice, there may be standing in this next case that's going before the Supreme Court whenever it finally comes around in order to deal with this situation. But unfortunately, this is going to be a civil suit. So it will be the SCOTUS looking at a civil suit review rather than a criminal suit. So it's going to be interesting to see whether or not the SCOTUS even bothers with the civilian tort claim. So
let me, I'd like to read this one, Joe, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Because I became the director of a nonprofit peace organization in August of 2000. And by September 2001, this is what happened. It's like, I wasn't looking for this, but it came to me in my position there. So for the last 20 plus years, it's been a major concern. So I will read this story. US airstrikes have killed up to 48,000 civilians since 9/11.
Yes.
An analysis. On average, US-led airstrikes have killed more than 1,000 civilians a year since 2001. This is just US-led airstrikes too. It's not other.
3 a day.
3 a day?
3 a day. 3 deaths a day from US airstrikes.
Airstrikes conducted by the United States, 3 a day, have killed between 22,000 and 48,000 civilians since September 11th, 2001, according to a report published Monday by Air Wars, a military watchdog that monitors and seeks to reduce civilian harm in violent conflict zones. The new analysis, released ahead of the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terrorist attacks and the retaliatory launch of the so-called War on Terror, I'm glad that they say that and put it in quotes, came just days after a US drone strike killed at least 10 members of a single family in Kabul amid the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. Most media accounts point out that more than 7,000 US service members have died in post 9/11 wars, but only some go on to state that the massive civilian death toll, and almost exclusively in generalities, researchers lamented. Reminds me of that song, was it the, oh, now I'm not remembering, the, with God on Our Side. It's a Bob Dylan song. You don't
No.
count the dead when God's on your side. The Neville Brothers. I remember the Neville Brothers rendition of that. And every time they sing they sing that part, but because you don't count the dead when God's on your side. Like it sent shivers and chills down my back. Because we need to count. We need to count the civilians. We need to know the impact of our airstrikes, our drone strikes, other things. And again, this is only about airstrikes. It's not other forms of.
Correct. And that's actually covered in the next paragraph. If you.
Okay, let's go on. Let's go on.
There you go.
Okay, while Brown University's Costs of War, I remember this from 20 years ago, project estimates that over 387,000 civilians have been killed as a result of the War on Terror. Air Wars sought to answer a specific question: how many civilians have likely been killed by US airstrikes in the last 20 years? The answer, Air Wars found, is at least 22,679 and potentially as many as 48,308 civilians. How many civilians were lost in Vietnam? Was it 55, or how many US military was something like 55,000, wasn't it? In Vietnam, in the
everything considered, it was a relatively low number. I hate to say that about the loss of American lives. Let's see, Vietnam casualties were.
That was over a 20-year period too, right? Or more than that?
No, it was significantly less than that.
So this is these dots. Each dot is one, right? And there's 100,000 dots. I just wanted to allow people to visualize each of those tiny little dots on that page is a dead individual at 100,000.
For those who are having trouble with that,
multiply that
by
number
3. Is 500.
Yeah.
So 387,000. That is 500 a day.
Yeah. 500 a day.
I believe that's my math. 500.
We have 24 hours in a day, so we can divide that up by hours in addition.
Well, 500 is an acceptable number. 500 is a number that people can relate to, and the realization that the war on terror killed more people on any given day than any of the people in America, than most people in America have earned in dollars. During that same time frame.
In that day. Strong point.
Should put some things into perspective. Now, thing is, 7,000 civilians over a 20-year period, with regards to the war in Iraq, the war in Iran or Afghanistan, our involvement in the Philippines. This results in supply chain losses, is starvation, famine, because they weren't able to get medicine to key locations at different times. The list goes on as to why these deaths. Now, an interesting statistic is in the last 20 years in Afghanistan, the population in Afghanistan somehow managed to double. Okay. So despite the fact that we were killing 500 people a day in Afghanistan through war and attrition, 20 years still allowed the population to double. Could you imagine what that place would look like now as far as economic success if it wasn't for the fact that we had spent every day killing 500 people that contributed to the Afghan economy?
Joe, are
mean,
you saying, Joe, that we might have something to do with the instability of the Middle East? Are you saying that we might cause some of
Why
that?
would I say something? Yes.
I
Yeah,
mean,
that's exactly what I'm saying, right?
and you didn't mention Yemen, you didn't mention Syria, you didn't,
No.
I mean, you couldn't mention them all. They didn't mention
Or
Iran.
South America,
and the sanctions.
And
the
The sanctions
war on
against
terror.
Cuba alone.
What's
Yeah.
that?
The sanctions against Cuba alone,
Yeah.
and they're our neighbor.
Yeah, I mean, the sanctions, there's some 39 countries in the world under US unilaterally imposed sanctions, not approved by any international body, unilaterally imposed and continued during the pandemic, making life even more difficult for people than it was already. Why?
yeah,
We actually had the sanctions against Afghanistan, and Afghanistan was one of those places that was having a fairly high attrition rate due to the pandemic.
Mhm.
Okay. One of the primary reasons why Afghanistan was able to recover was India helped get the vaccines into Afghanistan for the people who were interested in taking them. Now, a lot of these communities in Afghanistan are fairly isolated. So if a community comes down with it, chances of the community being wiped out before anybody can actually get in to help them are fairly high. But India was able to actually resupply and provide vaccines for the major city areas such as Kabul and Kandahar and Herat over in Herat province. So the major population areas were at least able to stave it off finally after we were able to get vaccines in, after India was able to get vaccines in to support and help stabilize the healthcare situation in Afghanistan. That wasn't something we helped with.
No, and I was in Afghanistan myself in 2005, so that's going back a ways. And there was a cholera epidemic that began while I was there. And when I came back, people said that's, if you wanted to use the terminology of first, second, third world, that was actually fourth world. There was virtually no healthcare system in place at all. The electricity was in and out all the time, but mostly out. People were concerned that, they would be brought to a hospital and not being given proper care. So that was in 2005, and I don't think things got better in the last 15 years.
Compare that to pre-U.S. involvement in Afghanistan. They were, they had some of the best schools and healthcare services.
They did. I mean, the Shah, back when it was still pretty much being treated as British colony, the United States in there supporting with agriculture. I love it. Morrison Knudsen, major dam builder, major engineering outfit based out of Boise, Idaho, right here, was part of the Green Revolution that went in and built one of the largest dam in Afghanistan, which was responsible for the irrigation of the Kandahar and Helmand provinces. Ironically, something we built 45 years ago. Americans, Idahoans went to Afghanistan, built this 45 years ago. We were responsible for the last 20 years for 80% of the global opium production annually because that dam watered the poppy plants. Go ahead.
Yeah, and then
you're good.
The slide that's, because you said, prior to U.S. involvement, things were, you used 45 years, Joe. We need to look at that. We'll get to the last slide where we see how long the U.S. involvement has actually been in Afghanistan.
It goes back to Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, no, I know. right there.
There we go.
1979. I knew
Exactly.
this, we had this slide here. So if people are arguing about who is the most to blame for what's going on, Biden or Trump, they're missing the point, because we've been involved as a country, Democrats and Republicans alike, since 1979. So that's 21 and 21, that's 42. 42 years. And that dam was put in 45 years ago. So that was just prior to the US getting involved, trying to get the former Soviet Union involved, which we did, in order
And
to
then
get,
we got upset when they did.
right,
Yep.
because we wanted Afghanistan to be the Russians' Vietnam.
Yeah.
We wanted to drain them and so on. And it did have some of that effect, but it also had the effect of building up Osama bin Laden and the Mujahideen. And so we set up this quote unquote war on terror. We set it up because bin Laden and the Mujahideen were all puffed up. And they said, we have power because we fought this proxy war. We did it. And then Reagan wants, no, you didn't do it. We did it. So we have this war, quote unquote, war on terror set up starting then. But Reef, did you want to play Mitt Romney over there?
I think we're
Let's play
running
Mitt
out of,
Romney. We got to wrap up here.
yeah, we're like running out of
We're running-
time a little bit, but
Well,
you know, this
There's
is
a
just
political slogan
essentially-
and endless
it's
wars,
not. I can
but that
end this
doesn't
at any,
translate into a
because
serious
it's pretty
policy
much
decision.
Romney.
And the real policy
doing
is this:
Romney
you
stuff,
can't,
so-
as one party, end a war. It takes two parties to end a war. The Taliban and the radical, violent jihadists in the world, they haven't stopped fighting. They're going to continue to fight us. The war is not over. We're just no longer in a place where the war had its apex, where the Taliban was able to allow al-Qaeda to grow and to attack us on 9/11. We went to Afghanistan because we got attacked on 9/11 and lost thousands of American lives. Now America is more in danger.
Now we just read,
Right.
we lost thousands of American lives on 9/11. We've killed how many?
yes.
How
Half
is it?
million, half
I
billion.
mean, what's
half
the
million.
return? What's the return rate on eyes? Because I thought it was an eye for an eye, not like. Is there like eye
I think
inflation?
we're going about 500 to 1 right now, 387.
Yeah, so you know, this is classic manufacturing consent, and you know, it's you know, war. The war's not over. The war can't be over if you got, you know, like in their opinion, the war is never over because it's a war on fear itself. Which
Yeah.
yeah.
And you know,
Yeah.
let me just put this in, because I remember after 9/11 reading everything I could get my hands on. And the one thing that relates exactly to what you're talking about, Reef, with the eye for an eye, how many eyes, was something written by Arundhati Roy. And she wrote, the name of the piece she wrote was The Algebra of Infinite Justice.
Yeah.
And it was one of the most powerful pieces I had ever read, and that I had read to that point about, well, okay, how many died in the World Trade Center, and how many were we killing in Afghanistan, and how much how many more will
Right.
make this just?
And
I just recommend it to anybody who's listening, because
That's under
it
the
kind of throws that whole
assumption
that whole argument out.
that we're working on moral values here. You know,
Yes.
that this is a
yes.
moral
Right.
decision to be at war here, and we all know it's not. We all know we don't care about the Afghani people as far as our government is
No.
concerned. They don't care. They care about what's underneath the Afghani people's feet. That's what they care about.
Right.
You know, the
The
oil, the
lithium and the
resources, the
minerals.
lithium.
Right
Yeah.
now, copper.
Yeah. So, I mean, this to
Right.
me is political
Okay.
opera. And I know that in Britain, they decided to try
Political
and
opera.
prosecute the leader that was involved in their dealings in Afghanistan. And guess what? Convicted when he was tried, if I'm not mistaken. That was, I can't remember exactly who was prime minister at the time. Was that Morgan, or I can't remember
Prime
who it was.
Wasn't it Tony Blair?
It might have been
Blair.
Blair in that sense, yeah. But
He
it
was
leads me to
one of-
what
Oh.
you're wanting to do with that you guys
Yes.
are wanting to try and get
Yes.
trials for this, debacle over the years. And I just wanted to, you guys aren't quite finished on the details of that yet. Where should people go to get updates on that?
Well, that's we have the GP Peace Action on Twitter.
Yep.
At GP Peace Action
I will
would
put
be
it
the
in
Twitter
chat.
handle.
I'll put it in
And
chat.
that's the Green Party of the United States Political Peace Action Committee, excuse me. And
Right.
we're aiming for October 7th, 2021. That will be exactly 20 years since the US invaded Afghanistan. And we want to issue some indictments that day. Just as you were saying, Reef,
Yep.
we need to hold people accountable. This is part of the reason that we keep getting into this kind of endless war, and we get people like Mitt Romney talking at 3,000 miles an hour about how it's making life more dangerous for us. We need to get off of this wheel.
Yep.
And the only way to do it is for people who've gotten us into this mess before to be held accountable for their actions.
I wish
Yeah,
you
it's
all
time
the
for us
luck
to be the
in
bigger
that
man and
regard.
actually take the hit.
Sorry, Joe?
It's time for us to be the bigger man and take our hits and just back out, because that's the only way this ends. Because as long as we keep being the police of the world, as long as we keep being the big bully, it's going to keep happening. So one of my friends, Magnus, he's doing a End the Damn Wars movement. There's about 5 or 6 different major marches occurring in cities across the United States, including the one in Washington, D.C. I believe there's one in Seattle, one in San Francisco as well. End the Damn Wars. Magnus has got those. Follow the hashtag Twitter on Twitter, and you'll be able to find out more about what's going on there. So
He's been making
again,
the rounds too.
the
He's on
Green
Misty
Party
and
is working.
Mm,
Yep.
he's
Green
been on a
Party's
few
working
places.
on theirs
So
October 7th.
yeah.
yep.
Yeah, no, and maybe we'll be able to resuscitate or revive or build the anti-war movement. And this is the time. We didn't really do much reflection on September 11th, 2001, as I recall. We didn't have time to grieve. We didn't have time to analyze what might have been behind that attack. We went right to war, and we've been at war ever since. Then maybe now we can take a deep breath and look at where this has gotten us, the trillions of dollars expended to replace the Taliban by the Taliban, and all the other things we've talked about, the problems faced by the people in Afghanistan. So I
Yep.
don't know, this might be a good time for us to, as a country, to finally take stock of what was done.
I agree. On that note, I think that's all we have time for. I just want to, support us on Patreon. Our links in the description. We would appreciate that greatly. And just follow KRTD on all the socials. We'll try to keep people updated on both those events. And like and subscribe. Do all that stuff. I think that's KRTD out, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Reef.
Thank you, Madeline.
It was an interesting evening. A great evening.
Yep.
Good night.
Good night. Turn me off.